Yay, we're recording. Okay.
Cool.
Just gonna set all this stuff down for a second and we'll start. So you were talking about your journey into blockchain as a non-technologist.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll let you give kind of a little recap of that, just very briefly.
Okay. At the school where I work at the university, we are approaching the new technologies from an entrepreneur point of view. So as non-technology guys, and me in particular, being a business guy by background, we look at these technologies as enablers for business models, and at times we struggle with reading white papers that obviously were written by technology folks for technology folks. So we are very much interested in new technologies, such as the Tangle and the hash graph, and the Holochain, as we see that there are certain deficiencies with the blockchain, and we would like to understand more on how these new technologies, and especially the Holochain, could be helpful in getting rid of the deficiencies of the blockchain, because we see the value of the distributed ledger. That's for sure. And we would like to know where you think the journey is going, how this new technology could help, and explain for dummies like me what it is really about.
I was muted. Sorry. I said, you're no dummy. I read your article. and I think we could probably share your video. It seems like I've gotten close enough to Wi-Fi that I'm okay on that front now. So you had asked me a question just before I went, oh man, this is going to be such a good conversation. I want to record it. And I think that question was, where do I see this stuff going, and what's the ambition? What are the next steps, et cetera? One of the core pieces for me is, rather than doing sense making at a network level, we really need mechanisms for enabling individuals to do sense making as individuals, while being able to rely upon some amount of that they're operating in a particular context. They're able to constrain the way that they're interacting with some other parties, so that they're able to rely upon signals that they get from that game, whether that is, or that applications, whether that's peer-to-peer Uber, peer-to-peer Twitter, peer-to-peer Airbnb, peer-to-peer inventory management system, right?
Right.
The why behind Holochain didn't have to do with money so much. We were really interested in facilitating different forms of social coordination amongst the members of a community. And from our perspective, one of the key features is, if you want that community to really be able to adapt in response to changes in its environment, you need to have the protocols, or the rules that the community is making use of, the processes that they're making use of for collaborative sense making, for social interaction and sense making. Those need to actually be held by the individuals themselves, so that those individuals can have power to decide, that wasn't working for me last time, I want to stop doing that. Or, that worked great, I want to do that some more, and I might tell other people about it too. And I don't know if you've looked at any of our stuff or any of my videos about where I've gotten interviewed.
I have, yes.
Okay. So have you seen the stuff on holographic storage and sort of the adaptive capacity advantages of holographic storage?
That I haven't looked into yet.
Okay, so there's a principle that we think is a pretty fundamental pattern that you see all over nature. And it has a benefit. The pattern is basically that state is held locally. That each cell holds on to its own state. It doesn't report to some CEO cell. There's no there's no ledger for the whole body and its trillions of cells. Each cell has its own set of instructions, and it is in a particular form. It's got oxygen or it doesn't. It has nitrogen or it doesn't. So it's in a particular state, and that state is held locally. That state is a consequence of the experiences that agent, that part, has participated in, that it has experienced. It sees the world from a particular perspective, and it has been transformed by those interactions into where it's at now. We think that holographic storage is actually the key. It's nature's preferred pattern for data storage and social coordination. And we think that's the case because though it has a couple of drawbacks, it also has one really significant advantage. The drawbacks, and I'll use language as a simple example here. English. You and I both speak English. Where is English held? It doesn't live in a dictionary. If it did, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation right now because neither of us have a dictionary on hand. Right? It lives inside of the brains and bodies of each of the participants. You have a version of English. I have a version of English. Right? These are sets of associations held internally by each of us. Are our copies of English identical?
Certainly not.
No, right? Yours have been shaped by your experiences. Mine have been shaped by my experiences. And so you being a professor in entrepreneurship and economics and somebody who's in Singapore, you have all these different jargons related to academia or the Swiss university system or economics that I might not understand. You'll use the word and I won't know what it means. Similarly, I have jargons related to surfing that you might not be familiar with.
Absolutely. I mean, a wonderful example, I think, in this context is the word power. Power. Ask a politician what the politician thinks power is. What a physicist ask a physicist. Ask a sports person, and among the sports person, ask a weightlifter and ask a synchronizing swimmer. They all will come up with fundamentally different definitions of power, right?
That are relevant to their context and have been shaped by their experiences. Exactly. So the downside of holographic storage is that sometimes you have miscommunication. That I will say something and you will maybe hear that, but the architecture on the two sides, there's a signal propagation that happens in between, but the architecture on the two sides didn't line up. Right? Now we have mechanisms for bringing them into greater alignment. You use additional words, more hand gestures. No, that one, dummy. Right? And we're able to build, to get to a point where when I say something, you know what I mean, and we're able to coordinate. Does it ever get perfect? No, but we're able to get to good enough. And at the end of the day, the point of communication is coordination at some level. So that's the downside is sometimes you have miscommunication, though we have some mechanisms for healing and improving our communication capacity. The upside, we think, however, is really profound. The upside is your entire community doesn't have to go and take a risk in order to explore something new. You can have just one part of your community go and check something out. And if they succeed, they can come back, let others know, and others can come and try it out. Oh, wow, that's great. And they come back and let others know. And the insight and the benefits of that can spread across the entire community. But the cost of doing that exploration is held to just the parties that went and took the risk. And so holographic storage, we see it in how ants explore, we see it in how bees explore, we see it in how language is held, we see it in how culture is held. Holographic storage enables the members of a community to get the maximum amount of learning in their context for the minimum amount of risk. It enables us to try new stuff without experiencing catastrophic failure. And in the entrepreneurship world, this is not news, right? All of the mainstream organizations are trying to figure out ways to do lean startup and agile, and all of those are about, hey, how can we constrain the size of risk-taking so that we can actually take risks? We think that principle, when you see it in biological organisms, biological organizational systems, they're taking it to a far greater extreme than we're seeing in human social organizations today. And that human social organizations, even the really vibrant entrepreneurial corporations, are still very top-down. They're optimizing for efficiency rather than resilience. And they actually have major deficits in terms of their sense-making capacity. There are benefits that can accrue, but there are also costs. And that in a context where the world is increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, where things are changing faster and faster, the organization that is not capable of sensing and actually being able to run an experiment, hey, does this work? Does it not work? That organization is going to go the way of the dinosaur. That community is going to really struggle in context relative to other organizations, communities that are able to make use of these more vibrant patterns.
Is that also what's your take? Is it what we currently see? Sorry, with the blockchain, that it sort of gets clogged. Is that this ambition of the universal consensus, where it's simply not sufficiently efficient anymore? Like, for instance, a biological organism. Is that your take? That's what we are seeing now with the blockchain and the Bitcoin?
There's two problems. So one, it's not efficient. The architecture of blockchain is not efficient because it requires every party to hold on to a copy of everything that anybody has ever done.
Exactly. So imagine a cell should do the same, right? Yeah. That would not work.
It wouldn't work, right? So it's just horribly inefficient. And so Holochain beats blockchain on that front by a million miles, because we're not having everybody hold on to a copy of everything. And we're not trying to do sense making at one universal scale. We're not trying to generate a single perspective for all. We actually see the blockchain as a really lossy, meaning it loses a lot of data, architecture. It's intentionally lossy. The proof of work and proof of stake algorithms are all about randomly picking someone whose perspective becomes the truth for the whole network.
Right.
Thus throwing away 99.9% of everything that everybody else saw. Sorry, there's a little bit of background noise here. People are having some loud conversations.
No problem.
The other piece, though, has to do with efficiency versus resilience. So my take on natural ecosystems is that you always have two things in any complex adaptive system. You have two things that are in tension with one another. One is efficiency in the current context, right? Do you eat cheaply enough, basically, and have babies and all that kind of stuff cheaply enough? And two is resilience. Are you able to withstand a shift in context? The very act that increases efficiency decreases resilience. The way that you increase efficiency is by reducing diversity. You stop doing the things that don't work in your context.
So it is about balancing those two things.
That's right. And there's always it's a sliding scale, but what you tend to see in natural systems is a lot of processes that are generative of additional diversity, because you can learn all sorts of, there's all sorts of lessons you can learn from the past about dealing with forest fires and dealing with certain bacterial things, and experiences that have been gone through sort of weed out anything that didn't work, in that context. But that doesn't prepare you for unforeseen circumstances. The only mechanism that a population has for withstanding unforeseen circumstances is sheer diversity. And we think of this, most humans who are thinking about these sorts of things, think about it in terms of, the diversity within a particular species, right? How many different sort of versions and how much genetic diversity is there? But the fact of speciation is actually an additional layer of diversity. One of nature's biggest sort of tools is the ability to have species cross into other areas and then be able to become completely independent, right? Be able to evolve in different directions. And when you zoom out, you see a much wider diversity of organisms, of organization structures, that make it so that a catastrophic failure of life in general is far less likely. Because you end up having, through an iterative process of two things. I don't like the term evolution. I think it tries to pack too much information into too small of a word. I prefer breaking it into two parts: generation and curation, right? Generation had a lot of babies, some skinny ones, some fat ones, some short ones, some tall ones. Mm-hmm. Curation, it got cold, the skinny ones died, right?
Okay.
And through generation after generation of that kind of process, you end up having a change in what the forms are that are showing up. Nature is totally fine with death. Death is a key part of its learning algorithm. It's fine with trying things and then failing. In fact, I have a hunch that death is useful even for social reasons. Like if you had humans who lived a really long time, they would be competing with younger humans that are actually more likely to be context fit. And so that might actually interfere with your species' ability to persist on an ongoing basis. Anyway, so this is the capacity for handling death as part of the evolutionary learning process is one of the key things that enables a system to avoid extinction, or a particular pattern to avoid sort of no longer showing up. I'm taking really deep philosophical weeds here, right?
Translate you to the holochain world. That would mean being able to deal with error, or how would you?
That's right. So part of it is we want people to be able to hold on to their own data, their own applications, and the way that those applications bridge, the way that they bridge between applications. We're trying to create an agent-centric world, or you could think of it as a human-centric digital ecosystem, rather than an application-centric digital ecosystem. So we're trying to make it so that this individual is able to decide to communicate in a particular way with a certain community, and they're able to play a shared game there. They're able to show up consistently in that context. Because they're following the rules of the game and they're signing. We haven't gone into the architecture too much. We basically have 4 parts: a shared storage space, local immutable logs, so tamper-resistant sequence of activities, signatures and public-private keys, and then shared code. So these are kind of like the 4 parts that make up a holochain, and I can go into more detail about how all that fits together in a minute. But the fact that when I start a holochain application, I also create a set of keys that I'm going to use in that one app. That enables me to act consistently from the perspective of other participants in that space. I'm able to tweet and then tweet again the next day and tweet again the next day, and people are like, wow, we love this guy, and they're able to perceive of me as a sort of persistent entity. And I'm able, then that allows you to build up reputation and all sorts of other stuff, right? But the capacity to have others be able to correlate your activities is sort of the core of any identity type system, which can facilitate a lot of social coordination. Separately, if I'm running a different application, I have a different set of keys over there. And from the perspective of even somebody who's participating in both those spaces, there's no indication that I am the same party in either of those. However, I have the ability to bridge between those spaces. I have the ability to take an action over here, communicate it over here, and demonstrate that I'm the same guy, right? So one of the things I might do is with this is kind of too deeply technical, but are you familiar with public and private keys? Do you know how that architecture works a little bit, or do you know what it's for?
Yes.
For folks at home, I'll explain it as, hey, there's 2 keys. One you share, one you don't. If you locked this box with one of the keys, the only way to unlock it is with the other. And if you lock the box with the other key, the only way to unlock it is with the one, right? And so it's this sort of asymmetric thing. It enables somebody to hold on to one key that they don't share, distribute another one widely. People can encrypt content and send it to them. Nobody else will be able to read it except for them because they're the only one with the private key. They're able to sign things, and that other people can verify. They can go, yep, that must have been written with this private key because we were able to unlock it, and we would only be able to unlock it with the public key if it had been signed with the private key. So that's kind of like a quick overview. It's also, these are useful for other things as well, but that's the main stuff. So I'm able to take an action in one space saying, I am this guy in this other application over here, and I can sign that here. Then I can hand it over to me on this side, and this, me as this agent in peer-to-peer Uber or something, can then speak that out into the space. And it's a bridge. I'm going, hey, look, I've got evidence that I'm actually the guy that's operating over here. And I might also make use of things that other people have said about me over there. Hey, he's always on time. His car is clean, whatever, right? So there's Lyft and Uber, and I'm able to take ratings from one and share them into another and make them visible to parties in mind. Now, if I do that, if I choose to bridge those 2 social contexts, they now are able to go back over here and check, did he share everything with me? Is there other things I might want to know about? Should I talk to other people and see what else they know? And this is a similar pattern to what humans do in the real world already. When I go apply for a job, one of the very first things I do is I pull portions of my history into the present context. I tell them where I worked previously. I tell them where I went to. I might introduce them to people, right? And that's both about helping them understand what I might be qualified to do or well-trained to do, et cetera, what kind of experience I might have. But it's also a little bit about letting them know who to talk to should I screw them over. That job application context, that might be the case less so, but in a lot of instances, this is very much the case. For like banking regulations and corporate incorporation, things like that, right? We need to have a body on the line because the legal system is entirely dependent on the ability to inflict punishment on a body. And so because the legal system only has that one way of interacting and wielding influence, if you want to do anything that touches the legal sphere, you end up having to pull bodies into that relationship. You can't just have a pile of papers. You've got to have directors, et cetera, executives. And in order for them to qualify, they're going to need to present particular forms of documentation that you could think of as speakings by a government agency, for instance, saying, yes, this is the photo, it matches the guy, here's his name, this is the birthday, etc. in the past, we've had only a handful of entities really able to speak in these kinds of high integrity ways. Passports, for instance, are reliable, or we're willing to rely on them because not everybody has the printing technology to manufacture it at home, right? So the fact that's closely held enables us to go, yeah, I believe that that was issued by a government agency. One of the things that cryptography enables is for us to have similar data integrity, but have that be democratized without it undermining the integrity of the speakings themselves. Now, there are some nuances here. So Holochain is really about, at the end of the day, can we enable forms of social organization, companies, community groups, governments, whatever, that function in these bottom-up ways that are great at learning, highly adaptable, highly innovative, great at, at thriving in whatever context they face, using the patterns that biological systems use, mimicking the patterns that biological systems use. I feel like I'm basically lecturing here, so maybe I should pause.
No. I highly appreciate it. Very interesting. But now, if we would look, I mean, or to become more concrete, how if we take we brought it up the example of a job application of a CV or resume that you would submit. So could we see the example, for instance, that you have your resume on your individual blockchain, if you want, or holochain, and then make parts of it available to the other party, and those parts which you rather less make public, you keep for yourself, but that you also grow this chain, your personal chain, and in this way be able to keep it private, but also share it, and share it by basically immutable. What you want to share, and make clear that this is the truth and nothing but the truth. Is that sort of the concept you would play if we would think in terms of resume?
It's very close.
Okay.
I would say that the slight difference is, instead of you having one chain, it's that you've got a bunch of different contexts that you're able to draw from. Right. And you're able to hand over at your discretion the things that, okay, I'm going to take this thing from this space and this thing from this space and this thing, and I'm going to share with maybe one individual within a community. I'm not sharing it with the entire community, just that one individual. Right. Hey, look, I'm this guy over here, I'm this guy over here, I'm this guy over here, and here's the things that others have said about me. You can also go to each of those communities and find out more, right?
So I would basically, I could grow my professional chain, I could grow my health chain, which I would share with doctors. I could grow my sports records chain that I would share with my teammates, and is that sort of an example that you could do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be less categorical than that. So it's not my sports chain. It's, hey, I played this game. You know, I was part of this league. And we were using this to like keep track of who was winning or what our stats were or whatever, right? And so I'm playing a particular game. We're making use of this medium, this writing substrate for how we're holding the rules of the game, how we're recording our participation in it, whether that, again, is basketball or accounting, but that's me interacting with a community. And if you think about it, this is sort of what we already do. So when you're operating in let me back up just a touch. There are a huge number of protocols that we make use of as humans. you walk into a fancy dinner and you understand internally there are some cultural expectations about how to behave in this context, right? What to wear, how to hold a fork, when to speak, whether or not to stand up and walk out of the room, at a particular moment. In the university context, we have some sets of protocols and ways that system functions. You have the rules of participation in a particular class. You have the rules of participation for how you get credits, what the right classes are that you have to participate in and get the right grades in order to get a diploma. Those are different layers of protocol that you're participating in. And if you become a part of that community and you engage in those processes, when you leave, you are transformed as a consequence of those interactions. And when you go and step into some job, let's say startup context, there's a different set of protocols there. There's not grade, right? There's pay, maybe there's performance reviews, but they have a different set of protocols. And the fact that each of the individuals that comes into that startup went through a different process before they got there. You had some folks who were engineers and they had learned all about engineering and had built skills there. And you have other people who are marketers and they learned all about persuasion and branding. And now they land in this space and they're dancing together. And that community is much richer because of that diversity. Their ways of making sense of the world are very varied. And it's not, in the university to job context is as if it's a sequence, right? But in the real world, it's much more dynamic. I mean, it's not just a sequence. Yes, sometimes things are sequential, but they also are crossing back and forth. What's happening is that individual becomes a bridge between multiple protocols. Become a bridge between the context of the business world and the context of the academic world. And we see this commonly in the academic world, right? I don't want to just write and speak. I also want to get my feet wet a little bit. I want to get my hands dirty and see how this stuff really works. Oh, wow, that was really informative. Okay, I want to go write and speak about that. And so these loops back and forth that prove enriching for both sides. Right. Part of why we're architected so differently than just about everything out there, including projects that I think are pretty interesting projects like Hashgraph, for instance. It's one of the main differences is most people talk about centralized networks, decentralized networks, and distributed networks. That's great. There are differences between them, but they're all networks. In a network, the participants have a shared protocol that they're able to speak, right? That protocol may just be electricity. Right? We're able to send signals on electrical wires, something like that. In an ecosystem, the difference is that you have agents who are able to speak more than one protocol and do translations between them. That they're able to receive a signal by hearing it and then send a signal through light. Two, he wants two, right? Or vice versa. I'm able to see that two gentlemen just walked by, and I'm able to see that and then speak it, right? So I'm transforming a resource from one form into another. This all gets into really deep philosophical stuff. The last thing I'll say there is information always comes in form. Right? Mm-hmm. We experience information, we perceive of information when we are transformed.
Okay. Yes.
We experience a sound wave only once our eardrum goes boom, boom, and moves, right? It's the fact that we got moved that stimulates some hairs to generate an electrical signal that goes into our brain. So our transformation is what enables us to perceive information. But because information is always in a particular form, sometimes we are capable of perceiving it, and sometimes we are not. Light, I can perceive. Radio waves, not so much. Right? And in ecosystems, you see organisms delegating sense-making to other organisms. You see cows delegating the sense-making and production of particular forms of information into more useful forms of information that the cow can consume. So grass looks out and it sees carbon dioxide and it sees water and it sees light and it goes, great, right? And it pulls in the CO2 and it drinks the water and it uses the light to produce glucose, to build up the actual grass matter out of that process. And it breathes out O2. It is transforming CO2, water, and light into glucose and O2. The cow is able to eat glucose and O2. The cow sees water, it's like, great. It sees light, yeah, that's nice. CO2, that's not so useful. But water plus glucose plus O2, I can do something with that.
Right.
And it itself has a 4-chambered stomach that does a bunch of processes that transforms that information into a different forms that I might be able to make use of, milk, beef, etc. Right? Mm-hmm. One of the key things here in a natural ecosystem is that you actually need multiple different organizing patterns in order to have a regenerative system. So in this cows and grass example, what's fueling that whole thing? The sun, right? It's got a bunch of resources. The sun is generating the power that's literally enabling us to strip carbon molecules off of CO2 and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So that's our source of energy that's coming into the system. The grass is transforming CO2 into O2. We'll just focus on that part of this. It's transforming CO2 into O2. The cow breathes in O2 and it breathes out CO2. So it's obvious that if you didn't have any grass, you wouldn't be able to have cows, right? They would starve pretty quick. But it might also be the case that if you didn't have any cows, the grass would turn the entire atmosphere from CO2 into O2, and then the grass would starve. Exactly. It needs the complementary shape or process that transforms materials back into their original form in order for us to have a regenerative ecosystem. So what does that mean? We want a wide diversity of social organisms that are capable of transforming particular forms of information and activity and resources in ways that prove useful for them and that can be counterbalanced by other social organisms doing the reverse. Right? So we're looking to try to enable more regenerative sense-making stuff. I'll kind of pause there because I'm, again, way far away from the tech and way into the philosophy. Let me take 1 second and try to apply that. So, great, cows and grass and yada, yada, yada.
You're up and over. Come on, bathroom.
A community makes use of a shared protocol to organize its flows of activity. That's similar to how the grass made use of a protocol to organize its flows of resources that it had available to it, its flows of activity. Different communities will make use of different processes for the particular flows that are available to them in the context that they face. Their ability to delegate to others portions of their sense-making, portions of their productive capacity is great, but every time you delegate, you're also making yourself vulnerable. Right? When I ask somebody else to cook for me, now I don't have to cook. But there's a chance I might get poisoned, right? Either on purpose or accident. Because that's the case, we believe that this decision to play this game again needs to be opted into repeatedly, right? That, yep, this is still working for me. Yep, I'm liking it. Yep, this is still working for me. Yep, I like it. But if somebody experiences too much pain, they're going to start looking for other ways to play. We want to make that fairly easy for them to do. And that's because we think that that's key to them being able to really level up their game and adapt to their context.
So basically, what you do is, we started off, or earlier on, we talked about efficiency versus resilience.
Yeah.
And what you intend to do in the social world, you want to provide the protocol that allows for a highly efficient exchange of these information, so that a right balance can be achieved between efficiency and resilience. Is that
in context? Yeah, and our belief is there's no one right answer, right? That different contexts will require different protocols. And
okay?
And there's another layer to this that is a little difficult to make visible.
Hey guys, over there, you know this door's fucked up. Slide the doors off too.
But sorry, I don't know if you could hear that. Folks were asking for help.
We're just trying to lock you in.
Yeah, I know. I was like, look at this.
So, I want to talk about layers of sense making. There's a layer of sense making here that is Matthew, right? And
Nice.
I am paying attention to, the things that are happening around me. Like I can see light, I can hear sound. I've got some hand gestures. There's some feelings that are going to
push the door a lot.
I'm paying attention to certain things. There's a piece of bacteria. There's some little cell of bacteria that's in my gut, and it is paying attention to something entirely different, right?
Right.
It bumps into something, and it's like, woo, food, and then it does its processes. It is conscious in a particular way. It's sensitive to the world and responding to that in a certain way. And I am conscious in a different way. And it is a part of the system of sense-making that makes up this layer. I wrote a little thing, I think it's on Medium, not too long ago, and I actually still have to write up the second part. But I wrote a thing called How Consciousness Emerges and Persists. And the idea here is basically that anytime you have an interaction between two parties, that interaction involves a communication. That communication results in a community. It's no longer just me and you. There's now a little bit of a we. That the way in which we are dancing together is different from how we were separate. And when we're dancing together like that, whatever that particular form is, we become sensitive to the rest of the world in new ways. And the rest of the world becomes sensitive to us in some new or different ways. The simplest example here for me on this is H2 atom, O2 atom, or H2 molecule, O2 molecule, O2 molecule. Those things are floating along. Let's say there's a bunch of them. They hit a flame. They light on fire. But if you assemble them in a slightly different way, and they are a handful of H2O molecules, and they hit that flame, they might extinguish it. When they are in a particular dance together, it changes how what they are sensitive to and how they interact with the world around them. Me, in the raw, not so good with radio waves. Can't perceive them. But you combine me with a cell phone. Well, the cell phone speaks radio wave, and it transforms that into light and sound. Because I'm able to speak light and sound, because I'm capable of perceiving and sending signals with those protocols, I'm able to leverage radio waves to extend my ability to communicate distances far farther than sound waves can travel, for instance, and much faster, right? This layers of sense-making thing is really critical for us. We think that it's really important that when people are using a particular application, each of the individuals is capable of perceiving of all this stuff from their own perspective, right? They're not having to adopt some network-wide universal perspective. That each of them is only really paying attention to the things that are relevant to them, and when they find themselves in a particular context, they reach out and pull down the portions of information that they think are going to be relevant to help them make a decision. At the social level, so that's each individual sort of holding on to this stuff that's relevant. At the social level, we are coming into alignment about the rules that we want to play by for this particular protocol, right? And if those rules stop working, okay, we try some different rules. At a level above that, individuals are able to bridge between multiple protocols, right? And so you end up having potentially really rich ecosystems of sense-making and transformation, and as a consequence, coordination that you just could not have if you were trying to do it as a one-size-fits-all. And if you were trying to do it as a one-size-fits-all, when you have a failure somewhere, that failure would prove catastrophic. Whereas when you do it in this sort of bridging ecosystems manner, people are able to try stuff out. And they go, hey, I tried this thing. That didn't work so good. I'm going to try something different. Oh, that works pretty good. Hey, you guys should try this. Right? And that's the mechanism by which learnings are able to propagate. They propagate from actual lived experience, where the tests were tiny tests. The tests were not a threat to the community as a whole or the ecosystem as a whole. There's some more nuance here. There's a book called Panarchy, Understanding Transformation in Human and Natural Systems. Pretty academic, really good, written by a bunch of ecologists. And they talk about some of the ways in which this sort of formation of coherence and then breakdown of coherence. Okay, give me 1 second. Somebody's asking to be rescued from a closed door. I am not sure what's going on here. Let's see. No problem. I'm Matthew. Nice to meet you. Okay, we'll cross paths. Okay. There's like a broken bathroom door or something, and we had 2 people get locked in there. Anyway, so yeah, there's the Panarchy thing, and if you Google it, it's got a really interesting, almost like sideways or diagonal infinity symbol diagram that really does a good job of showing the ways in which particular organizing patterns come to emerge, mature, and then get disrupted, basically. And they're applying it in business, they're applying it in social structures, they're applying it in ecological systems. It's a really useful way of thinking about this. If you want to have resilient systems, this is kind of the formula. And for us, we feel like it's really critical that humanity come up with better mechanisms for orchestrating our coordination that are capable of handling the scale that we operate at today, but that kind of counterintuitively, that actually requires this kind of diversity of sense making, not we will all perceive of everything in the exact same way. Right. This is a much richer way. Another way to frame it is, this enables the system to make maximum use of the available resources and the available information. Yeah. I mean,
I totally agree, and I think that's also what biology teaches us, is that we only also perceive as much information as we need. So we humans, we have 2 eyes and we have ears that serve our purposes, but we are not owls, and because we don't need to hunt for mice at night. And
That's
and,
right.
and,
That's right.
and so would we have additional sensors to perceive all that information? We may go bonkers because it doesn't serve our purpose. And I assume that would really happen if we would now all of a sudden could register radio waves, for instance.
That's right. And there's a.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're stuck.
I'm blanking on the name of the individual who made this quote. It's on my blog, but the cost of information is simple. It's attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
The cost of too much information is us having to process that information. And organisms that, nature doesn't favor organisms that perceive ultimate reality, that perceive of all of the things that are happening. Like you just pointed out,
I need a bench.
good enough for cheap enough kicks the shit out of perfect any day of the week. Because the organism that would be sitting there paying attention to everything that's going on, the rate at which the temperature is changing in the wall around you and all these other things, it's got a huge cost of doing all that information processing. And something else that comes along and goes, oh, chicken, right? Eats far cheaper. And so let's perceive of everything and let's sense everything, that's incredibly wasteful and it dies off really quickly. When we need to make sense of the world around us in ways that we are not capable of, we tend to find ways of extending our sense-making capacity through delegation. We do that in terms of the food that we eat, as I kind of illustrated before. We do that in terms of reaching out to friends for recommendations, right? Those are all mechanisms of extending our sense-making capacity so that we can do the minimum and gain the maximum.
Right.
Yeah.
And we love to do that with TripAdvisor, and the Pope does it with all the priests he has around the globe, right? So
That's right.
That's a delegation of sense making.
Yeah.
I have one more important question, and that is, ecosystems they need to be within a certain bandwidth, so that it doesn't tip over at one point and gets destroyed or destroys itself. Interestingly enough, as a society, I think we have the mechanisms to make ecosystems tip over, and that is debt, as we've seen in the global financial crisis. And that leads also to a very concrete example, which is always discussed about in Bitcoin, the double spend, or how that is coped with. In biology, cells would hardly go into debt, maybe for a very brief period of time and for certain purposes, but other than that, there's no debt, and there is certainly no interest on debt that a cell would demand back. So can you briefly explain how you tackle that problem, that the very hands-on problem that humans would like to fool others by double spending,
Sure.
whereas biology would by nature not allow it?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. The double spend, I'll go into sort of what the version of that might look like in a Holochain app, and then how you might counter it. It's called a Finney attack, but we'll deal with that in a second. The deeper question is around we're trying to foster some coordination. I'm going to take a step back. Have you read David Graeber's Debt, the First 5,000 Years?
Yes.
So Graeber is awesome, and then he talks about how the barter system never really existed as an actual economic system that a community used widely. And he talks about how credit relationships are really how most human societies have structured themselves.
Yes.
And the credit relationships aren't just monetary style credit. It's all sorts of signals of people giving credit or bearing witness to something that someone else has done. Even if it's just internally. Wow, I saw he did a great job. Maybe I should ask him to do that again, right? And so people are getting credit for the activity that they are doing. Now, then we came up with some mechanisms for making that credit visible to others.
Yes.
Right? And so that starts to enable us to delegate sense making at a larger level because of our ability to issue these credits, essentially. Cryptographically, Holochain is kind of built on this architecture. We think of everything as a speaking. It's not just data that is true or not true. It's a claim or a speaking that is made by a particular actor. So I am signing that he was a great guy. So it's Matthew who's speaking this, not he is a great guy. It passed the processes for the entire community. He counts as a great guy. No, it's Matthew who said he's a great guy. And then also Bill. And then also Jim, right? And we're cryptographically signing that. Okay. We call this agent-centric computing rather than data-centric computing. If we were to take the temperature in the room here, you would say, hey, what's the temperature? And I might say, oh, it's 15 degrees Celsius. Is that actually the temperature in the room? Well, it depends on where you are in the room, right? If you're next to the furnace, it might be a little higher. If you're next to a window, it might be a little colder. It's a speaking by a particular agent. Which agent? The thermometer. It's making a claim, and it might be inaccurate. So it's making a claim based on where it is, specifically what its context is, and it might not be accurate. It might be off by 2 degrees or something, but it's a claim. If we did temperature, like if we wanted to figure out what the average temperature is across the globe over the course of a year, one way to do that would be to have thermometers all over the globe, and every 10 minutes we would randomly pick a thermometer, and we would write down that number, right? If you do this over the whole course of the year, you're probably going to get the average temperature for the globe for that year. But that doesn't mean that the temperature for the globe was 17 degrees this time, and then 10 minutes later, the temperature of the globe was -3, and then 10 minutes later, the temperature of the globe is 20, right? That's really funny. That's kind of silly to frame it that way, but that's how the blockchain does it. Holochain goes, no. Hold on to all of the data and who is speaking it. According to this thermometer in Malaysia, this is the temp. And according to this thermometer in Russia, this is the temp. Right? And you can do that as often as they want to report in, okay? And what that enables you to do is not just what's the temperature for the whole globe. It enables you to do what's the temperature in that town? How did that temperature change over the course of a day? What's the difference? How is there storms moving in a particular direction? Right? All of these different things that you're able to do because you're able to cross multiple perspectives. Each of those thermometers had a perspective on the world, and we're able to get a story out of them as a result. Comparing various thermometers inside of Malaysia, we might be able to, just from the data alone, determine that these ones are probably indoors. These other ones are probably outdoors. Because look at the pattern here. Look at the differences between those two patterns. You had mentioned humans having 2 eyes, and you were mentioning that as comparing us to owls, and hey, we don't need the kind of vision capacity that owls have. But I want to talk about 2 eyes from a slightly different point of view. If you cover one eye and you look out at the world, you'll see an image. And if you cover the other eye and you look out at the world, you'll see a different image. And if you have them both available, you'll see depth. The depth comes from the combination and detection of difference between multiple perspectives.
Yes.
That when you take multiple perspectives and you have them accessible to you and you're able to look for differences between them, it enables you to extract richer information than if you just have one. That's true whether it's 2 different perspectives running the same protocol, light, right? Or 2 different perspectives because we're operating different protocols. I heard something and then I felt something, right? What was that? Oh, is that a dog? No, it's a cat, right? It was a dark room. I wasn't able to see, but I was able to hear and then touch, or I was able to hear and see. And so we are able to do richer sense making because of our ability to combine protocols. our ability to combine different, we call them grammars, basically, different ways of dealing with information through transformation. There's a really geeky paper that's unfinished, but that is on the Metacurrency website called Grammatic Capacities in Complex Adaptive Systems. Again, it was loud here. So grammatic capacities in complex adaptive systems. And that paper is about how new grammars emerge. And it's an interesting piece. So I'd check it out. It basically has to do with the ability to send a signal, like having a shared medium, the ability to send a fluctuation on that medium. We call that a signal. The ability to receive that fluctuation. And as soon as you have that receptive capacity, and from our perspective, it's actually that receptive capacity that is the most important. That your ability to receive a signal is the thing that ends up launching a feedback loop, right? And that enables you to, okay, now we have sending and receiving capacities. All right, now we can, you can think of that as a grammar, and it itself becomes a new medium, a new carrier that we can do fluctuations on. So we got bumping atoms, or we have atoms next to one another. The fact that we can make them bump into one another, we have a sound wave. We can send and receive sound waves. Oh, cool. Now we can do different types of sound waves. We can do right? And we can start assigning meaning, and we can get into jargon. We're able to build these nested. We're able to build these nested layers of protocol. We're also able to do parallel protocol stacks, right? So things built on top of sound, things built on top of light, etc. And there's a computer scientist from the middle of the 20th century. He wrote a paper called A Mathematical Theory of Communication, a guy named Claude Shannon, in 1948. And that paper was like 55 pages, and it basically spelled out digital technology. He laid the groundwork for the entire information technology industry. And he defined the problem as being about having a message, being able to send that message and not have it change shape, have it arrive as it started. And he was an engineer. He was trying to solve things in the telephone systems and telegraph systems and other similar things. And he was like, hey, let's create the theoretical underpinning. And it was brilliant work, right? It literally launched world-changing stuff. And our perspective on, or my perspective on this, I'm trying to work on a paper right now where I basically go, he kind of defined the problem in a way that was really useful for engineers, but it's led us to some not awesome patterns and technologies. Because he defined the problem only as message propagation and not about the larger coordination between those actors, he wasn't focusing on the ability to gain feedback loops of higher alignment in their coordinative capacities. And he was solving a specific problem. But the way to frame this is the architecture, the medium, influences the signal, right? Mm-hmm. But the signal also ends up influencing the architecture. So the brain, the structure of the brain influences what you can do in terms of firing neurons. And you go and you try learning how to walk as a kid, and you're stumbling and you're trying different neuron paths and different musculature. And then at some point you find something that works and you go, oh, and you try it again, and you try it again, and you try it again. You're having our brains reward us for sort of figuring things out, right? And when you're trying it over and over and over again, and you start repeating this process more and more, running all that signal through the same pathway ends up building up that pathway. You actually reshape the architecture. And it gets to such an extent that the architecture just dictates. You're not even having to think about it anymore. You just, right. And a whole series of things fire off. And so these are the kind of higher level feedback loops that emerge once you're paying attention, not just to, were we able to send a message, but were we able to send a message, get feedback, and then iterate, right? did I have multiple paths, multiple protocols on which I could figure out whether there was a failure? You know, I had said something, but I didn't have to hear. I could see that he had done the wrong thing. Right? So there's these different ways that additional protocols reduce the difficulty of coming into alignment and improving our coordinative capacities. Wow, I'm like way off in philosophy land, so apologies for.
No. I mean, it's interesting, and I think that it also goes back to what you already mentioned, that you know, our set of communication and our sets of English are different. Whereas in the pure digital world, you know, what a sender sends is what the receiver receives. It's basically a one-to-one copy, whereas as human beings, as socially raised beings, we will always have different understanding of what is said and what is received, right? And there needs to be a mechanism that makes sure that most of the time we understand each other, but not necessarily all the time.
That's right, and we have mechanisms for improving that, right? We get feedback. Shit, this failed. You know, I said to go do something, he didn't do it. He didn't understand what I said. Oh man, we got to work on this, right? And so then that teaches us to invest more effort in that for the next time, and enables us to learn and adapt. I had a big disagreement with a friend of mine last week, a wonderful guy named Mitra Ardran, who I respect tremendously. He worked on the HTTP specification. He worked on the URL specification. He's brilliant. Mm-hmm. He's done stuff in computer networks and in solar, not just solar panels, but like solar power ecosystems. I mean, the guy's brilliant. But he's an old hand computer scientist, and he's going, I don't want failures. I want the signal to always be reliable. And I was going, no. The cost of that is that you lose all adaptive capacity and resilience. You end up only being able to update your protocols through some standards committee or something like that. And like we were talking about earlier, the cost of that global level sense making is far too high. Basically, it loses in any sort of evolutionary context, evolutionary sense. And so from my perspective, we actually want the ability for people to try things and make mistakes. We want and to be able to learn from those. And they will decide how much risk to take based on how confident they are that the context they're operating in is going to work out well. It's how the natural world works. This friend of mine, Christopher Allen, who's another big computer science guru guy, he co-authored the Secure Sockets Layer protocol, so SSL, which is the most widely used security protocol on the planet. He wrote a really good blog post in, I think, 2004 on something called progressive trust. He didn't get into the security stuff because he was interested in security. He was interested in coordination. He was interested in leveling up humanity's capacity for coordination, right? And when he, oh no, I lost Patrick. I'm gonna wait. I don't know if his laptop died or we have been talking for a while. I'm going to pause the recording for a second. I had lost you for a second there. It looks like you came back, but now you're paused on my end. I'm going to stop video. Can you hear me now? You are muted. I'm going to unmute you. Can you hear me?
I think it was on my end.
Okay, cool. Great. All right, so we're back. So Christopher Allen wrote a blog post in 2004 on progressive trust. And the idea of progressive trust is how trust actually works in the human world. The idea being we take baby steps, right? we start by going, making eye contact at the bar. You know, that's a risk. It's a small risk, but that's a risk. And then maybe we introduce ourselves. Hey, I'm Matt. You know, oh, okay, I'm Monica or whatever. And little by little, we see how this is working, and we assess the context. Okay.
Sorry, which source was that you
This
mentioned?
is a blog post that Christopher Allen had written in 2004 on something called Progressive Trust. You can Google it. His blog is called Life with Alacrity. Progressive Trust. And he just points out the ways in which, in order to build trust, yeah, we're doing this trial and error thing, but we start out by taking really small risks. And as we gain comfort and familiarity, and we become better able to navigate that context, whether it's a social context or something else, we begin taking other, bigger risks. We may make ourselves vulnerable in significant ways. When you sign a contract with somebody, you're really taking a big leap in vulnerability. You're pulling the whole legal system into that relationship, potentially making you go to jail at some point if you refuse to comply with whatever a judge says about how you had performed in this contract, et cetera. And so he points out that there's all these mechanisms that we make use of for actually getting parties to kind of tie themselves together in various ways. But it's an iterative dance. And we, part of how I think about this is I do a lot of work on identity and identity systems and the design of those, mostly from the philosophy end of things, but also from so this is how we're going to need to build those architectures. One of the things that's not so awesome about money is that money cancels out the relationship. Money is really about you and I being able to interact without having to have a relationship. We just trust that somebody else is going to accept these dollars, right? And so I don't need to, and this is one of the things that Graeber talks about in Debt the First 5,000 Years, is in a communal relationship, what happens is I make myself vulnerable in some way. I help you out. Later, you help somebody else out. Later, they help somebody else out. And what's happening there isn't just, we're helping. What's happening is that we're actually shifting our sense of identity away from just a you and me as separate entities into a we. That shift happens internally to the participants themselves. Sometimes we'll call this falling in love, right? The military makes use of this sort of feature of how human brains work in order to maximize the performance of their units. They don't get people don't go to war and throw themselves on the battlefield because the pay is good. And they don't do it because they're worried about going to jail. And they don't do it because they were told that it was that it was a smart thing to do. At the end of the day, if you're on the battlefield and your commander says, you need to go over there, and you have to literally put your life on the line to do that. The reason that you go and do that is because you had a strong bond with the other men in your unit or men and women in your unit.
Exactly, yes.
And you saw that group as who you were at some level, and that you cared so much about them that you were willing to sacrifice yourself if necessary to protect that group. And it's a characteristic that is really about shifting our sense of self. But the way that we do that is through making ourselves vulnerable and through repeated interactions. And so part of what the Army does is they make, some drill sergeant the bad guy for you guys to cohere in opposition to and bond in opposition to. If there's no enemy, great, we'll make an enemy, and we're going to make life real hard so that you guys fracture as individuals and then come together as a unit, and that you perceive of yourself in ways that are intricately tied to these other humans. Money is not about that at all. Money is not about the building up of communal relationships. Now, the Army is using this. That's kind of a blunt instrument, right? You can think of it as a really manipulative way to get people to do things that you want them to do. But families work in these ways. Social groups work in these ways. Money is erosive to those patterns of communal relation. And as a result, most people intuitively feel that. If you, somebody makes you dinner and you go, oh, that was awesome, here's $50. They might feel offended because they intuitively understand that, no, this isn't that kind of relationship. This isn't a transaction. Right? This is a communion. This is a coming together.
And how is there a way you tackle that in your holochain concept?
Yeah, so the holochain comes out of something called the Metacurrency Project. And the Metacurrency Project is really about designing interoperable currency systems. But we define currency a little differently. Instead of defining currency as money, we define currency as signaling, right? The ability for communities to send information to one another and essentially use symbols to communicate about flows of activity, to make flows of activity visible in particular ways. So a grade is a currency. It makes a flow of a mastery of knowledge for a particular subject visible. You got a grade on the test, it was a passing grade, great. You knew that material well enough. Passing grade in a class, it's a different currency. A diploma, it's another currency. It makes visible that you had gone through this whole process. And the use of that currency is that when you take that diploma into a job interview, somebody's able to go, engineering degree from MIT, huh? Without having had to sit alongside you and witness you going through that 4 years. So there are a variety of types of currency that enable us to make visible a variety of forms of wealth or coherent flows of activity. And so the Metacurrency Project is really focused on enabling communities to generate currency systems for helping them coordinate their activities and operate them. We had spent much of the last decade working on something called Scepter, which is based, the name comes from the word receptor, which came from that insight that we had about receptive capacity actually being the key to these coordinative upgrades. And the main thing that we had worked on in Scepter for the last several years had to do with this interoperability layer. Hey, when you're wanting to bridge between contexts, how can you do that? And we think we've cracked that. We did a proof of concept. There's open source code available. It's all built in C, based on, this is super geeky technical stuff, but semantic trees and something called semtrex or semantic regular expression. So long story short, ways of building bridges, or more likely repurposing bridges between protocols so that you can quickly link translation layers between different communities. Often it's the case that information that is available in this system, there's no way to represent in this system. So like we might have address, city, state, zip. Over here we've just got city and state. Okay. The address info, when you come in this direction, you just drop that because they don't, it might be information here. To these guys, it's noise. They don't have a mechanism for paying attention to that detail. That stuff that part of their protocol is, I don't want to pay attention to those details, right? When you're going in the opposite direction, you might need to make a decision about how to transform city and state into, what are you going to put in the address field? Do you put the center of town? Do you put not available? Something else, something like that. So these are choices that get made, but if you want this stuff to really scale, you have to make it so that these sort of bridgings become easy. We had built all that. We were building it as an integrated standalone system that we were trying to have be the new architecture for the internet based on biological organizing patterns. And the next layer that we had to build had to do with syncing between two different receptors, between two different lightweight virtual machines. That's computer science jargon. Basically little computers that aren't actually physical computers. They're sort of like software computers.
Like a Java virtual machine.
Exactly, Java virtual machine. So you can think of what we were, if you have a multi-instance virtual machine, so hey, this is the same thing, but we're having like several of them, so we've got backups, so even if one goes down, like we have others. We needed a syncing mechanism for that, and so we needed a data integrity, a distributed data integrity engine, Holochain. So that was the next layer in our architecture that we needed to go build for our own use. And what we decided was, hey, if we're going to build it for ourselves, the rest of the world's all hot and bothered about blockchain, but blockchain looks dumb to us, right? So let's go do this as a standalone module, just like all the rest of our stuff. We'll release it as open source code. We'll put it out into the world. And unlike Scepter, where people have to break their brains 12 different ways to wrap their heads around it, Holochain, they got to break their brains 1 or 2 different ways. Like, it's much easier to go, ooh, cool, we can do distributed applications? Like, great, we've been trying to figure that out. And so we're putting Holochain out there to solve that. That said, Holochain doesn't yet have this bridging functionality. Right now, our roadmap is get Holochain out, which we launched in alpha, but we'll be maturing that this spring. We're releasing our first big application on top of Holochain, which is Holo, and that builds bridges between these peer-to-peer apps and the centralized web. So it enables grandma to book a room just by going to a website and typing in a URL. And Holo provides us with the business model. It's got a mechanism for rewarding hosts for doing this work. We take a transaction fee. Yay, that helps fund the development of that infrastructure for Holo, but also the underlying infrastructure for Holochain more generally. 50% of the revenues of that organization go directly into the foundation for Holochain. That said, we wanted Holochain to be operated independently because we didn't want it to be owned or controlled or subject to any of the pressures that a for-profit organization might experience. The next thing on the roadmap probably doesn't show up until 2019, but Eric, one of our 2 co-founders, is really excited to get back to the protocol for pluggable protocols stuff, this bridging between systems stuff. And the plan is to re-implement the things that we've already done, but to do it as a standalone layer that plays well with Holochain, but that will also be able to play well with other systems. We think that because that's sort of like one of the holy grails in computer science, solving interoperability, we think it's going to be pretty transformative. So Holochain is sort of the first step. It enables bottom-up running of applications. That becomes a building block that we start to get to play with some of these other steps over the next few years. And our hope is, within a decade, we'll see really drastically different. The world will look just drastically different. The way in which we coordinate, the way in which we organize our activity, the way in which we do government and business is far more ecosystem-like than hierarchy.
Right. Wow, that is quite a plan ahead of you.
Yeah, we've been working on this stuff for a decade.
And is it? Are you affiliated with any particular institution, or are you a group of people from all different types of backgrounds and institutions, or
no institution?
What's your makeup?
We were an all-volunteer project. Basically, Arthur and Eric had been software developers. They're the 2 co-founders, Arthur Brock and Eric Harris Brown. They met at an alternative currencies conference in 2004. Eric's been a software engineer much of his life. To be totally honest, in the mid-2000s, he was getting ready to leave software engineering because it was just no longer interesting to him, and he didn't feel like he was able to solve the kinds of problems that that the world was facing, and so he started looking into currency systems. And then once they got deep enough into currency systems, they realized, oh man, we got to do software. So we have to actually build a new medium of communication. Arthur also had been a software developer. He'd run software companies. He set up a company called Dream Team Technologies at one point, which was a managerless organization. They had no bosses.
Nice.
In order to be able to run, he ended up trying all kinds of different things. And what he realized over time was, oh, all of these tools that we're using for self-managing are actually just currencies. These are currency systems. Huh. And he got so interested in that he ended up going down that path and became a professional currency designer. He designed currencies for hundreds of communities and companies and other organizations.
And are we talking about electronic or cryptocurrencies now, or
all sorts of currencies?
Okay.
All manner of mechanisms for making flows of activity visible to the members of a community so that that community can better self-steer.
Okay.
Right.
And again, I mean, in biology, I mean, cells also communicate along with currencies, right?
That's absolutely right. They have all kinds of different signaling mechanisms. They have very rich signaling. It's not one. Our take on money is it's a currency. It's a useful currency, but it's a one-dimensional currency. More money, less money, right?
Yeah.
We need all kinds of other signaling systems in order to steer ourselves. And we do. We have those. We have brands, trademarks and things like that. We have certified organic and fair trade and, USDA ground beef, grade A. We have all kinds of different currencies. Most people don't think of those as currencies because the only thing they think of as currencies is money.
Right. And then, well, if you see it as signals, as you do, well, you have plenty of currencies, right?
That's exactly right. And so if you want systems to be able to self-steer, they actually really need rich currencies to be available to them. The one thing that Holochain enables that has not been possible before is unenclosable communication, meaning you and I are able to communicate in the way that we want to without having to get anybody else to agree to support us in that communication. And we're able to do that in a way where so long as any party wants to continue participating in that, it doesn't go away. That's a little different from even things like writing. I send a written note to you. Somebody could intercept it along the way. They could alter it, etc. We come up with all kinds of different mechanisms, wax seal with a stamp, for trying to indicate, oh, wait, this got tampered with. But we think that the tools that we're making use of right now, these kind of cryptographic tools, enable us to communicate in ways that maintain coherence while being anchored in our mutual decision to play by those rules. We refer to this principle as mutual sovereignty. That if at any point you're like, this isn't working for me, you can take your money and run. Take your data and run.
Wow. Cool stuff. Very cool stuff. You're in Davos right now.
I am. Yeah, I'm in a blockchain crypto agency.
What is your next destination, or where are you located normally?
I live in San Francisco, but I'm on a 2-month community building tour here in Europe. So I just landed last week. I was at an event called the World Web Forum in Zurich.
Right.
Organizer Fabian is a friend of a friend, and he had invited her, and she told him about me, and he invited me. Their whole theme was like the end of nations or something like that. And so she said, you might want to pay attention to what these guys are up to. And he said, bring him. So I came for that. I got asked to speak at a little satellite event here in Davos. And I spoke this morning on privacy and identity. I may end up speaking about other things later on in the week. We'll see. After this, Liechtenstein, then France, and then who knows. My hope is to hit up 25 or 30 cities over the next 2 months. And meet up, speaking at other people's events, meeting with corporate partners, meeting with government agencies, meeting up with social activists and community groups, because our focus is on getting people introduced to these patterns and getting them to be able to start playing with these patterns, these new ways of building and running apps.
Okay. Fantastic stuff. I mean, the problem you may encounter, especially in Switzerland. Switzerland is a rather conservative country, and some people have just become acquainted to the term blockchain. Yeah. Hearing now about the next thing, the Holochain, some will go really sideways hearing that.
They will, and that's okay.
But
the proof will be in the pudding, right? If people start building applications and they prove useful, that becomes visible to others, and then they pay attention.
Exactly, and you know, on a positive note, Switzerland is a very decentralized country. You know, formally Switzerland doesn't have a capital. It's Bern is just the seat of parliament. It's officially not the capital, so it has no capital. And Switzerland has multiple currencies, you know, money currencies. So they're officially, if you look up the ISO code for currencies, you'll find 3 Swiss currencies, and one has been around for 100 years. So people. So the concept of having multiple currencies is not new to that country. No.
Yeah, I spoke with some folks at the. I spoke with a bunch of really great people at this World Web Forum event, including some of the folks who've been working on the Swiss identity system stuff, digital identity architectures, and some of the people who had been involved in that and had helped set it up. They basically, after talking with me, were like, "I want you to talk to the people who are working on the ID stuff," and they went, "Oh, I think we might be building a new system on top of old mental models. And maybe we need to rethink this." And that's great. I would love to work with folks like that. And, you know, that's my role. My role is to go out, make these things visible, enable people to start playing with these new patterns, try to connect them with one another so they can learn from one another, you know? And we'll go from there. If you know of,
so when will you be in Singapore?
I don't know. Not until the spring at the earliest.
Okay.
I'm not sure when I'm going to be in spring. The basic gist is, my hunch is Europe is the most fertile ground for this to take root. In terms of,
I assume so too.
Yeah, just this political, social, geographic, you know, proximity, the concentration of capital, all of these things. It's a good place to start, and if it starts here, it'll spread. So that's the focus for me at the moment. I did have some good meetings this morning with someone who was doing developer training, like university kind of stuff in Africa, and he was interested in, oh wow, maybe we can start introducing people to this pattern, having them learn how to build things in this way. And my take on it is, that's where we'll really start to see the initial implementations that actually transform a society, right? It'll be much easier for these new patterns to take hold because there aren't competing institutions that are going to box them out.
You're right. I mean, if there's not a very strong legacy infrastructure, you can more easily get into it.
That's right. But I don't think that's the place where we start. I think we start in Europe. Folks, corporations, governments, individual developers, community groups, they start playing with this stuff, and very quickly, if they're building useful stuff, that will start getting implemented in other places, and those people will do some amazing things. That we will have the social entrepreneurs taking these patterns into refugee camps and other places like that, and building distributed identity systems that don't actually deprive the individuals of agency, that leave them empowered instead of disempowered. And all sorts of other architectures.
Well, fantastic stuff, Matthew. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction to Holochain.
Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic. Appreciated. And I'll think about potential parties or people in Switzerland maybe who would be interested, and we'll drop you a note.
That sounds wonderful. And if you know of other folks that might be interested all across Europe, I'm right now doing that outreach. I'm trying to figure out, where am I going? Who am I meeting up with? Oh my goodness, look at that guy. He's adorable.
He wants to go. He wants to go for his walk now.
Okay, we'll let him go. So yeah, please ping me with. I'll send you all my contact details if I haven't already. Anybody that you can think of who you think they're going to be interested in this, please put me in touch. I've got a few other team members that do outreach and stuff. my whole job right now is meeting all of the interesting folks, especially the ones at the cutting edge, people who are the community builders or actually running projects, or the theorists, the academics that are looking at this and trying to make sense of, hey, what's coming. So I want to talk to all of those people.
Cool.
Awesome.
Cool. For sure, let's stay in touch. I mean, I'm very curious to see how it continues, your journey. It's fantastic stuff.
Awesome. Professor, thank you so much.
Have a good time.
Okay, take care.
Have a good time.
Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.